She was gripping my sleeve before I knew her name. Before I knew anything about her except that she was small and the crate she'd been sealed inside was stenciled biological spoilage, disposal authorized, and that she was alive when she shouldn't have been. I'd been moving through way station Dorev for 6 hours by then, looking for a pressure coupling I could trade for fuel. Dorev had been dead for 3 years, rim collapse casualty, same as 40 other waypoints on the outer corridor. The authority called it an orderly drawdown. The people who'd lived there called it something else, but most of them weren't around to call it anything anymore. I'd stopped having opinions about it. I'd stopped having opinions about most things by then. When you spend long enough moving through dead places alone, the opinions start to feel like weight you can't afford. The crate was in Sub-Bay 7, stacked behind a collapsed shelving row. It shouldn't have been breathing. The manifest on the side listed it as organic refuse, cleared for atmospheric venting, standard disposal language for the authorities' resettlement purges. I walked past it. Then I stopped, because the manifest tag had been torn partway off and underneath, in very small handwriting, someone had written a name. I don't know why I opened it. I wasn't looking for a child. I wasn't looking for anything that breathed. She was curled in the far corner, knees to her chest, enormous silver eyes open in the dark. Savari. I placed her species by the gill slits at her jaw, the faint copper sheen of her skin, the layered wrap she'd been dressed in, now dirty and frayed at every edge. Small. Younger than I was comfortable thinking about. She looked at me the way an animal looks at a thing that hasn't decided what it's going to do yet. Not afraid, exactly. Past afraid. Arrived at something quieter on the other side of it. I said, in Savari trade pigeon, that she could come out. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she reached out and took hold of my sleeve, just below the wrist, and held it. That was all. I stood there in Sub-Bay 7 of a dead way station with a child's hand on my arm, and I felt the weight I'd been carrying for 3 years shift. Not lift. Just shift. Like something that had been sitting wrong finally settled. I picked her up. We left. Her name, I learned over the next 2 hours, was something I couldn't pronounce in the standard alphabet, for syllables that required a palate click on the third. I called her VY. She allowed this. She said very little, but she watched everything with those silver eyes, and once, when I misjudged a floor panel and nearly dropped through a pressure gap, she made a sound, a low, rapid trill, that turned out to mean warning. I filed that. Dorev's transit corridor ran 40 kilometers from the main hub to the emergency resettlement egress at the far end. My ship was docked at egress bay 12. 40 kilometers on foot through a station with failing life support and intermittent gravity plating wasn't a comfortable journey, but it was manageable. I'd done worse. What I hadn't counted on was the authority cutter in orbit. I picked up its transponder signature on my handheld scanner about 3 kilometers in. Calvary Resettlement Authority, light enforcement class, the kind they sent to dead waypoints to process outstanding reclamation orders. Uncategorized displaced persons. Unregistered biological assets. The authority had very clean language for the things it came to collect. VY was watching my face while I read the scanner. I didn't change my expression. She reached up and touched the corner of my jaw, lightly, with 2 fingers, a Savara gesture I didn't know yet, but which I would eventually learn meant I already know. I kept moving. The corridor had 3 junction points before egress bay 12. At the first, a door that should have been sealed was open, and through it I could see torchlight moving in the adjacent service passage. Not authority. The movement pattern was wrong, too scattered, too careful. Bounty crew. Someone had contracted them to sweep the dead sectors ahead of the authorities' arrival, skimming the profitable finds before the official reclamation teams came through. VY pressed her face against my collar and went very still. I took the maintenance crawlway above the junction. 20 minutes in the crawlway with a child who weighed almost nothing and made no sound, while below us the bounty crew moved through the junction in groups of 2. I counted 7 of them. My ship had basic defensive countermeasures and a docking corridor I could seal from the inside, but 7 was a number I didn't want to test against. We came out on the far side of Junction 1. At Junction 2, the gravity plating was intermittent, cycling on and off every few minutes in sequence, section by section. In 0G intervals, I carried VY against my chest, one hand braced on the wall rail, and she held onto my jacket with both fists and kept her eyes open the whole time. Not panicked. Watching. She was cataloguing. I had the impression she had been cataloguing everything since the crate. The scanner updated. The authority cutter had begun descent. They'd be in the station within 40 minutes. Junction 3 was where it ended, one way or another. The corridor opened into a wide staging area, an old resettlement processing point, rows of empty intake stations, the authority's standard architecture, numbered queuing lanes, classification terminals, the cold functional geometry of a system designed to move bodies through categories at volume. I stopped at the edge of it. Standing in the center of the staging area were two groups. The bounty crew, 5 of the 7 I'd counted, the other 2 presumably behind us somewhere, had come through from a parallel passage. They were spread in a loose line, weapons out but not raised. Across from them, at the far exit, was the authority advance unit. 4 officers in the standard grey-green of Calvary Resettlement Enforcement, their own sidearms holstered but accessible. The 2 groups had arrived at the same time and were doing the careful arithmetic of shared interest and conflicting claim. In the middle of all of it was the exit to Egress Bay 12, and my ship. I stepped into the staging area. Everyone looked at me. Then at VY, who was held against my chest with one arm, her silver eyes steady. The authority lead officer was a tall Calvary, species I knew, pale, angular, the rank bars of a senior reclamation director on her collar. She looked at the child, then at me, then at the classification terminal beside her as if she might consult it. The biological asset from Sub-Bay 7, she said. Her standard was precise. Registered under Outstanding Reclamation Order 479er, Dorev Way Station Resettlement Purge, Cycle 3. Hand it over. I looked at her for a moment. No, I said. She blinked. The word didn't seem to land correctly. You understand that unauthorized possession of an unregistered displaced minor constitutes. I heard what it constitutes, I said. The answer's the same. The bounty crew shifted. Their leader, a Ravan male, built like a bulkhead, had been watching me since I walked in. He had the flat eyes of someone doing fast calculations on profit margins. A live child was worth considerably more than a dead surveyor. I could see him working through it. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the authority officer, because she was the one who mattered in the next 30 seconds. Here is what I understood that she didn't. She had come to a deadway station to process a reclamation order on a child in a crate marked disposal authorized. She had a legal framework, a chain of authority, a set of classification codes that told her what the small scifi was and what should happen to her. The framework was enormous. It had processed millions of displaced persons across the rim collapse. It was very good at what it did. What it had no category for was a human being who had made a decision that the framework was not going to apply here, and who was not angry about it, and was not afraid of it, and was not going to negotiate with it. Not a soldier. Not a rebel. Just a man who had been alone for 3 years in dead places and had arrived, very quietly, at a line. There's something in that particular kind of stillness that doesn't translate across species. I've never been able to explain it entirely. It isn't threat display. It isn't defiance. It's something older, something that reads, at a deep register, as, this is where I stop, and nothing you have classifies what happens if you try to cross it. The authority officer looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the bounty crew, who had not moved. The Ravan leader's eyes went from me to the officer to VY to the exit behind me. He was still calculating. But calculation on a human who has gone still in that particular way is difficult, because the expected inputs aren't producing expected outputs, and that means the projected return becomes unreliable. He put his weapon on safe and took a step back. It wasn't a surrender. It was a deferral. They would find something else worth their while on Dorev. They didn't need this one. The authority officer was still looking at me. This reclamation order is valid under Section 12 of the Resettlement Compact, she said, but her voice had changed slightly. Something in it had become procedural instead of certain. File an appeal, I said. I'll be off station in 20 minutes. I walked through the staging area, straight through the center of it, past the intake stations and the numbered lanes and the classification terminals, to the egress corridor and my ship. Nobody moved to stop me. I don't know why, entirely. I've thought about it many times in the years since. Part of it was the calculation on the bounty crew side. Without them, the authorities' 4 officers against 1 human in a corridor they didn't know, with a 20-minute window before I was in open space, was an unprofitable problem. Part of it was the authority officer's own arithmetic. An appeal would take 6 weeks. I'd be in a different jurisdiction in 6 hours, and the political cost of escalating over 1 uncategorized child from a closed resettlement zone wasn't worth the cost. But part of it, I think, was something they didn't have a file for. VY was quiet until we were through the docking seal and I had the egress bay doors cycling behind us. Then she said something in Savari that I didn't understand, and when I asked her to repeat it, she pressed her palm flat against my chest, over my heart, and held it there. I learned, much later, what the word meant. It doesn't translate cleanly into standard. The closest approximation is, the one who did not leave. She was 12 years old when she sat the compact citizenship exam. She passed on the first attempt. She called me from the examination hall afterwards, and the first thing she said was that she had listed my name in the field that asked for next of kin, and she wanted to know if that was acceptable. I told her it was. Then I sat down, because my legs weren't steady. The Empire had a name for every unclaimed child from the Rim collapse. Unregistered biological asset. Disposal authorized freight. Reclamation Order 479er. They had no word for what I became, standing in that staging area with her hand on my sleeve and her silver eyes steady, and the full weight of their framework bearing down on a decision that had already been made. I think about that sometimes. The gap in their language where the word should have been. I'm glad they never found one.